Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be delving into law and social justice in India.
A really fascinating area.
Absolutely. And we've got this great collection of articles and legal analyses, even some economic reports. So much to unpack here.
Yeah, we're going to try to pull out the most interesting parts for everyone listening.
Right. It's like, well, you said it earlier. It's like a legal safari. Instead of looking for animals, we're going to be uncovering these laws and how they impact millions of people.
Exactly. And the challenges of making sure things are fair for everyone.
Exactly. Okay, so let's dive right in. One of the first things that pops out from all this material is the Minimum Wages Act
Right.
and how it's designed to protect workers, vulnerable workers, from exploitation by making sure there's like a baseline wage.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is that India's Minimum Wages Act, it isn't just one number. It's not like a fixed amount. It changes, actually. Yeah, it varies depending on where you are, what industry you're in, even your specific job.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It recognizes that the cost of living, just what it costs to live, is different everywhere across the country, and the economy is different in different places.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of law
Exactly.
that tries to really adapt.
Yeah. And to keep up with, things like inflation prices going up and just the economy changing, they actually revise the minimum wage periodically.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they make sure that, with prices going up, that people's earnings aren't just disappearing because things cost more.
Yeah, especially in a place like India, where inflation can be pretty high sometimes. But I'm curious about, from your perspective, thinking about the impact of these minimum wage laws, have you ever thought about how they affect businesses?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Especially maybe smaller businesses,
Right.
Do you think it always strikes the right balance between protecting workers, but also allowing businesses to survive and thrive?
It's a really tough question. There's strong arguments on both sides. Some people say that if you have a really high minimum wage, it's going to be hard to create jobs, especially for small businesses who don't have a lot of money.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But then others say that it's super important to make sure workers can actually afford to live,
Wait.
and to fight poverty.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act for sure.
It is. No easy answers.
Yeah.
Definitely. So to sum up, I guess, the Minimum Wages Act, it sets that kind of floor for wages.
Right.
And it's different all over the place based on where you are, what you're doing.
Yeah, and it gets updated, to keep up with how the economy is doing.
Exactly. It's like a safety net.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to worker safety, something that really stood out in these sources.
Yeah, and I think there's no sadder example of what happens when worker safety is ignored than the Bhopal gas tragedy
Yeah.
back in 1984. It's, a really tragic example of what happens when those safety standards aren't there or they're not enforced.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking to read these accounts. Thousands of people died from that gas leak at the pesticide plant.
And the injuries, hundreds of thousands.
And the long-term health problems.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's a stark reminder that when profit is put ahead of people's safety, it can have these just devastating consequences.
Absolutely. And what's so disturbing about Bhopal is that it wasn't just some freak accident, There were signs, there were leaks before. Workers had raised concerns,
Wow.
but the company ignored them.
So it really was a failure, not just of regulations, but also just of, doing the right thing.
Yeah, corporate responsibility, taking responsibility for what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And, Bhopal, it really set off this wave of activism and legal reforms.
Yeah?
People really pushing for stronger safety laws, for holding companies responsible for what they do.
Yeah.
It forced everyone to really think about the value of human life compared to just making money.
Right. It makes you wonder how we can prevent this kind of thing from ever happening again. Do you think just having stricter laws is enough?
It's a good question.
Or do we need like a totally different way of thinking when it comes to corporate culture?
I think, people are still talking about this, still debating it.
Yeah.
You definitely need strong laws, and you got to enforce them. But I think you also need companies to have a culture of safety, where workers feel like they can speak up and safety is the top priority, not just seen as something that costs extra money.
Yeah, it's like shifting that mindset from safety being an expense to it being an investment
Yeah, absolutely.
in people.
Yeah, it's an investment in your people, in your company's future, really.
Yeah, exactly. So worker safety laws, we can define those as the regulations that are there to protect workers from dangers in the workplace.
Right. Covering things like the equipment, how they handle chemicals, what to do in emergencies,
Yeah,
all designed to make things safer, and make sure that people have a healthy place to work. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, like a shield. Okay, so the Bhopal tragedy, it also showed just how important strong environmental protection laws are.
Absolutely.
That gas leak, it didn't just affect the workers in the factory.
It went way beyond that. The whole surrounding environment, all the communities around it, devastated.
Really just shows that development shouldn't come at the cost of, people's health and well-being.
And, after Bhopal, you saw a lot more environmental activism, people pushing for stronger laws.
Yeah.
And the courts, they started to recognize that the right to a healthy environment, that's part of the right to life.
Wow.
It's essential, in the Indian Constitution.
So it's not just a nice to have, it's like a fundamental right.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge development.
Yeah, that's huge. It makes me think, I'm curious, how do you see this balance between protecting the environment and, allowing for economic development?
Right.
How does that play out in your own community?
Well, it's a question that a lot of communities are struggling with, especially in countries like India that are developing so fast.
Yeah.
The real challenge is how to find ways to grow the economy without, destroying the environment and hurting people's health.
Right.
It means we need to shift to a model of sustainable development.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, it means thinking about the environment from the beginning, making it part of every decision we make and holding companies accountable for the impact they have.
Makes sense. So environmental protection laws, those are all the rules and legal frameworks that aim to, well, protect the environment.
Right. From pollution, from unsustainable practices, trying to find that balance between developing and preserving our resources, not just for us, but for future generations too.
Right. A really good summary.
Thanks.
Now, the source material, it also talks about this interesting concept of the environment as a public facility.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting way to think about it. Like, it's not just something we use and exploit.
Right, exactly.
It's something we all share and have to protect.
It's like, clean water or public transport.
Yeah.
It's something everyone has a right to, not just the people who can afford to live in, fancy areas.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So this concept, it could really give communities more power to demand action against polluters.
Right.
And hold, the authorities accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not a simple concept, It's got some complexities to it.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. Sometimes the courts will order a polluting factory to shut down.
Right.
To protect the environment, which is good, but then people lose their jobs.
That's true.
And often those are the people who can least afford to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And they might not have any other options.
Right. Right.
So you have to think about the social and economic impact of these regulations too.
Yeah, you really have to think it through.
Absolutely.
Okay, our deep dive also brought up this whole issue of foreign companies operating in India and what that means for worker safety and environmental standards.
Yeah. One of the things that attracts foreign companies to places like India is that there's this big workforce.
Right.
A lot of people, and the wages are generally lower.
Right.
But that can create a situation where the workers aren't valued, They're seen as expendable.
Yeah.
And companies might cut corners on safety just to save money and make more profit.
It's like that allure of cheap labor. Sometimes it really overshadows any ethical considerations.
Exactly. And it's not just worker safety. Trying to cut costs can also mean they don't care about the environment.
Right.
Dumping toxic waste, breaking the rules because they know they can get away with it in countries that don't enforce the laws as strictly.
Yeah, it's like taking advantage of the system, putting profits ahead of everything else.
Exactly. So it really raises the question, how do you hold these companies accountable?
Right.
What do you think? Can things like international pressure or boycotts make them change their behavior?
It's a really tough question. I think consumers have a lot of power nowadays, We can choose which companies to support.
Yeah.
But governments also need to step up.
Right.
And enforce the rules, whether it's a local company or a foreign one.
It's about making sure everyone plays by the same rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we can define this idea as kind of an ethical dilemma that comes up when companies, often from richer countries, operate in places where the standards might be lower.
Right, and it raises all these questions about worker exploitation, environmental damage, and whose responsibility it is, the companies, the governments, to make sure things are done ethically and sustainably.
Okay, so we see this pattern emerging, right? This idea of moving hazardous industries to developing countries.
Yeah, it's like sweeping the problem under the rug.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. So these developed countries, they face stricter rules at home, people protesting, so they just move their dirty industries to countries where the rules are weaker. It's really unfair, you know? They're exporting the risks and taking advantage of people who might not have the power to fight back.
It's like a double injustice, you know? First, you create the pollution, and then you dump it on someone else.
Exactly. And the consequences can be devastating. You know, think about industries like pesticide production, asbestos, processing toxic materials, lead, zinc.
Yeah.
They often end up in developing countries, putting workers at risk, polluting the environment.
It really shows how the global economy, it doesn't always benefit everyone equally.
Right.
What do you think? Do developed countries have, a moral obligation to address this pollution that they're essentially exporting?
It's a tough question. I don't think there's an easy answer. But I think it requires everyone working together, international cooperation, stricter standards across the board,
Yeah.
and empowering developing countries so they can set their own terms,
Yeah.
Not just being pressured into accepting these polluting industries just because they need the economic growth. It's about making sure that development doesn't come at the cost of people's health in the environment.
So this concept, we can define it as basically when industries, especially the ones that are hazardous or polluting, move from those developed countries to developing countries because the regulations might be weaker.
Exactly. And it brings up all these issues of environmental injustice, worker exploitation. And it asks who's really responsible, both the companies and the governments in both those countries.
Okay, moving on to workers' unions.
Yes.
The sources we have, they really highlight their importance.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to protecting workers' rights.
Right. They're so essential, especially in industries where workers might not have the power to negotiate for themselves,
Yeah.
to get fair wages, safe conditions, benefits.
It's like united we stand, divided we fall.
Exactly. When workers come together, they have a voice, They can bargain for better treatment, hold employers accountable to the laws.
Yeah.
And unions can push for changes in policies that benefit all workers and raise awareness about things like exploitation and safety issues.
So it's not just about getting a bigger paycheck.
No, it's about bigger change.
Systemic change.
Exactly.
But it seems like they face a lot of pushback.
Oh, yeah. Employers often resist them. Sometimes the government puts up roadblocks.
Yeah.
And there are even cases of violence against people trying to organize unions.
Wow.
It's a reminder that fighting for workers' rights is not easy.
It's a constant battle.
Mm-hmm.
So to define, workers' unions are these organizations that are formed by workers for workers.
Right. To fight for their interests, for better pay, better working conditions, benefits.
And they do this through collective bargaining.
Right. Negotiating with the employers, lobbying for those policy changes, really trying to create solidarity among workers, giving a voice to the people who might otherwise not be heard.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to consumer protection. These laws are in place to protect, consumers like you and me.
Exactly.
From unfair practices.
Consumers are essential, right? Every market needs them, so their rights need to be protected.
Absolutely.
There are laws to make sure consumers aren't being tricked, taken advantage of, or put at risk by, dangerous products or false advertising.
Yeah.
To make sure the marketplace is fair and transparent so people can make informed decisions.
Right. It's about making things a little bit more even. Businesses, they often have more information and power than the average consumer.
Exactly.
So these laws cover all sorts of things.
Right, like setting safety standards for products so people don't get hurt.
Yeah.
Making sure essential things like food and medicine are actually safe to consume, that kind of thing.
So when we buy something, we know it's safe, it does what it says it's going to do, and it's not going to hurt us.
Exactly.
And there are laws to prevent price gouging.
Right, especially when there's an emergency or a shortage of something, making sure that people can still afford those basic necessities, not just those who can afford to pay inflated prices.
Right, so no one is being taken advantage of during a crisis.
Exactly.
Okay, so to put it simply, consumer protection laws, They're there to protect the interests of consumers in the market.
Yeah, they cover things like product safety, making sure things meet quality standards, fair pricing, and no misleading advertising.
Yeah.
It's about giving consumers power, making sure they're treated fairly, and promoting a marketplace that's transparent and ethical.
So this source material, it actually mentions a recent case where a travel agency was ordered to compensate a bunch of tourists
Oh, yeah.
because of a really poorly managed trip.
It's a great example of how these consumer protection laws can actually be used to hold businesses accountable.
Yeah.
You know, the tourists in this case, they missed out on activities they were supposed to do.
Oh, no?
They had all these disruptions because the agency messed up.
Yeah.
So the court said, nope, you got to compensate them,
Wow.
ordered the agency to pay a significant amount.
It shows that these laws have teeth.
Right. They're not just words on paper.
They can actually deliver justice.
And it highlights how important it is for consumers to know their rights
Yeah.
and not be afraid to stand up for themselves, even against big companies.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't even know what their rights are, or they're hesitant to take legal action.
Right.
So it's a good reminder that you do have options.
Yeah. It's empowering to know that there are ways to fight back.
Absolutely. But, you know, it makes you think about the Bhopal gas tragedy, where the compensation, despite all the suffering, was so much lower.
It's a stark contrast and really disturbing when you think about it. Why do you think that is?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
It shows you the limitations of the legal system, you know, especially when it comes to these massive disasters. And it's really hard to hold multinational companies accountable, especially in developing countries.
Yeah, it feels like they have all these resources to fight legal battles, and the victims often don't.
Yeah.
So it's like this imbalance of power.
Bhopal is really a tragic example of how these legal battles can drag on and ultimately not deliver the justice that people deserve.
So the fight for justice, it can be long and hard.
Yeah, and especially when you're up against powerful corporations.
So how has this whole environmental awareness evolved in India?
Well, you know, in the past, environmental concerns weren't really a top priority.
Yeah.
The focus was on developing the economy quickly.
Right.
The environment was just seen as something to be exploited.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But then major events like the Bhopal gas tragedy happened,
Yeah.
and more scientific evidence about climate change came out,
Right.
and it really changed the way people think.
It was like a wake-up call.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People started to see the environmental costs of this unchecked development.
And realize that it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
The health of the environment and the well-being of people.
Absolutely. And that shift is reflected in the rise of activism, stricter laws, and even court decisions that uphold that right to a healthy environment.
So there has been a real shift.
Yeah, a gradual one, but a significant one for sure.
A change in how people think about and value the environment.
Yeah. People are starting to realize that natural resources are finite, that ecosystems are all interconnected, and that damaging the environment has long-term consequences.
And that protecting the environment isn't a luxury, it's a necessity.
Right, for a healthy and prosperous society.
It's about finding that sustainable path.
Exactly. Meeting our needs today without screwing things up for future generations.
Okay, let's talk about child labor. This is a serious issue that came up in the source material.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about.
Children being denied their childhood.
It's a violation of their basic rights. They're deprived of education, their health suffers, and they lose out on the chance for a better future.
It's a problem that needs urgent attention. What can be done about it?
Well, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
It has deep roots in poverty, in lack of access to education, and even in social norms that just accept this exploitation of children.
Right.
India does have laws against it,
Yeah.
but enforcing them is really hard.
Yeah, especially in rural areas where poverty is widespread.
Exactly, and where people might not even be aware of the laws. There was an amendment to the Child Labor Act back in 2016.
Okay.
It made the ban on employing children under 14 stricter for all types of work, and it banned employing adolescents in hazardous jobs.
That's a good step.
It is. It's a step in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go to eliminate child labor completely.
It seems like it requires changing people's mindsets.
Absolutely. And improving the economic situation, making sure all children have access to education.
So we can define child labor as any work that deprives a child of their childhood, interferes with their schooling, or is harmful to their development physically, mentally, socially.
Right. It's a violation of their basic human rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's prohibited under international law and most countries' own laws.
Yeah, including India.
One of the source materials It actually includes this very striking cartoon. It shows a young boy carrying this heavy load.
It's a powerful image.
It's a powerful image that represents the burden of child labor.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of the injustice faced by millions of children who are denied their childhood, forced to work, often in dangerous conditions, to help their families or because they're being exploited. That cartoon, it really highlights the invisible weight they carry, you know? The missed opportunities, the stolen dreams.
It's a call to action.
Absolutely. We need to raise awareness, enforce the laws more strictly, and change our society so that we value the well-being of all children.
It challenges us to think about our own role,
Yeah.
How are we complicit in systems that allow this to continue? Are our consumer choices supporting industries that exploit children?
Right. Are we turning a blind eye to what's happening? We all need to demand better from businesses, from governments, from ourselves.
And even small actions can make a difference.
Yeah, being informed consumers, supporting organizations working to end child labor, it all adds up.
Let's move on to the rights of marginalized communities in India.
Right, groups like Dalits, Adivasis, religious minorities.
These communities have faced historical discrimination.
And they're often denied basic rights and opportunities.
So the Indian Constitution, it acknowledges these injustices.
Yes.
And it has specific provisions to protect these groups.
Like affirmative action policies,
I see.
Things like reserving spots in education and government jobs.
Yeah.
To try and create a more level playing field.
It's about trying to make things fair.
Exactly. And the Constitution, it also bans discrimination based on caste, religion, ethnicity.
Right.
It guarantees equal protection under the law for everyone.
But do those principles actually play out in reality?
It's a good question.
Do they?
Sadly, often they don't.
Yeah.
Even with these legal safeguards, these communities still struggle.
Yeah.
They face poverty, they lack access to education, to healthcare, and they're still stigmatized. The discrimination, the violence, it's still happening.
Yeah. It shows that laws are important, but they're not enough.
Exactly. We need to keep working to fix these deep-rooted inequalities and change those attitudes in society that lead to discrimination.
So it's about legal reform, but also about education, about raising awareness and empowering these communities to know their rights and claim them.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue for sure.
So when we talk about the rights of marginalized communities, we're talking about the basic rights and freedoms that everyone deserves.
Regardless of their background, their social status, their economic situation.
Right.
These rights are spelled out in national constitutions, in international agreements, in human rights declarations. It's about ensuring that everyone has equal access to things like education, healthcare, employment, justice.
Yeah.
And that everyone is free from discrimination and violence.
So what role does international law play? And these international organizations, how are they involved in promoting social justice in India?
India has signed on to a lot of international conventions and treaties that are all about upholding human rights and social justice.
Right.
And those agreements set standards for protecting workers, women, children, other vulnerable groups.
So it's about aligning with these global norms and standards.
Exactly. These agreements, they cover a wide range of issues, Everything from protecting the environment to fair trade practices, preventing discrimination and torture.
Right.
It's like a roadmap for countries to follow as they try to achieve social justice.
And are there mechanisms to hold governments accountable, to make sure they actually follow through on these commitments?
Yeah, these agreements can be used to hold governments to their promises.
Yeah.
And to seek justice for people whose human rights have been violated.
So it's not just a set of guidelines, it's also a means of enforcement.
Exactly. And you've got international organizations like the United Nations and its different agencies.
Yeah.
They play a crucial role in monitoring how these conventions are being implemented. They provide support to countries, helping them to meet those human rights standards.
So they're like the watchdogs, making sure countries are doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, they're also doing research, publishing reports, pushing for policy changes that address social justice issues all over the world. They speak for the people who don't have a voice.
Yeah.
Raising awareness about human rights abuses and demanding accountability.
They have a big role to play in shaping how we think about social justice globally.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that they're not all powerful. Their effectiveness can be limited.
Oh, how so?
Well, you've got things like state sovereignty, political considerations, and sometimes the enforcement mechanisms just aren't strong enough.
So countries can choose to ignore these agreements.
Yeah, Or they can just pick and choose which parts they want to follow.
Right. And often there's a big gap between what they say and what they actually do.
Right. So these international frameworks are important, but they're not a magic solution.
They need the political will of nations to actually work.
Exactly. So when we talk about international law and organizations in the context of social justice, we're talking about all those treaties, conventions, customary rules that govern how countries and organizations interact.
Yeah.
And a lot of these legal frameworks, they focus on things like human rights, labor standards, protecting the environment, and other social justice issues.
Right.
And those international organizations, like the UN, they work to promote these standards, to keep an eye on things, and to push for their implementation.
A lot of moving parts.
It is.
Okay, so there's this specific example of how international law has impacted India. And that's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
CEDAW.
Yeah.
A very long title.
It is. It's a landmark convention adopted by the UN back in 1979. Basically, it's an international Bill of Rights for women.
Okay.
It requires countries to take action to eliminate discrimination against women in all areas of life.
So it's a plan for achieving gender equality.
Exactly.
Mm.
And India ratified CEDAW in 1993.
Meaning they agreed to uphold those principles of equality and women's empowerment.
So it was a big step towards acknowledging that women face systemic discrimination.
Absolutely. And CEDAW has really made a difference.
Oh, no, so.
Well, it's led to new laws in India addressing things like domestic violence,
Okay.
dowry harassment, and discrimination against women in the workplace. It's also given advocacy groups a framework to challenge discriminatory practices and hold the government accountable.
So it's had a real tangible impact on women's lives.
It has. But there's still challenges, you know?
Yeah, I can imagine.
We're not there yet. Those deeply rooted patriarchal norms, the stereotypes, the economic disparities, they all make it hard for women to fully enjoy their rights.
So it's an ongoing fight.
It is, but at least now there's a strong legal framework to back it up.
Yeah. To define it succinctly, CEDAW is this international treaty that spells out what discrimination against women looks like.
Right.
And it sets up a plan for countries to take action to stop it.
It's a blueprint for change.
Okay, so let's talk about technology.
Well,
it's everywhere these days.
It is.
And it can play a role in both promoting and hindering social justice.
Yeah, technology is a double-edged sword.
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, it can empower people, it can amplify marginalized voices, promote transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it can make existing inequalities worse.
How so?
Well, for example, access to technology isn't equal in India.
Right.
There's a big gap between urban and rural areas.
Yeah.
And between different socioeconomic groups. This digital divide, it can mean that some people get left behind.
They don't have access to information, to education, to economic opportunities.
Exactly. So it's really important to make sure that technology helps to bridge those gaps, not make them wider.
Right. But we have seen technology being used for good in India, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Social media has become this powerful tool for activism.
Yeah.
People can organize protests, raise awareness about issues, hold those in power accountable.
It's like giving a voice to the voiceless.
Exactly. And mobile technology has made it easier for people in remote areas to access education, healthcare, financial services.
Right.
And online platforms have created a space for. And online platforms have created a space for marginalized voices to be heard, to challenge those dominant narratives.
It's like democratizing the media.
Exactly. Giving more people a platform.
Yeah.
To share their stories and their perspectives.
So technology can really be this force multiplier for social justice.
It can, but we have to be realistic, Technology can also be used to reinforce biases and discrimination.
Oh, how so?
Well, those algorithms that are used in social media and other online services, they can reflect existing societal biases.
Yeah.
And they can actually amplify them, leading to outcomes that are discriminatory.
It's like baking prejudice into the code.
Exactly. And then you have things like facial recognition technology, which have raised concerns about privacy and the potential for misuse, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. They're already subject to a lot of surveillance.
So it's like, be careful what you wish for when it comes to technology.
It is. It's powerful, but it has to be used responsibly.
Ethically.
Yeah, ethically.
So when we talk about technology in the context of social justice, we're talking about all those tools, techniques, and systems.
Right. And how they can be used to improve access to information, education, healthcare, and economic opportunities for marginalized communities.
Right.
But also recognizing that they can be used to worsen inequalities and for surveillance.
It's really about using it wisely.
Yeah, being thoughtful about it.
Okay, so another concept that came up in the source material is this idea of social audits.
Yeah, they're really interesting.
So these are like a way to make sure that development projects and government programs are actually doing what they're supposed to do.
Right. They involve the community, all the stakeholders,
Okay.
coming together to assess the impact of a project, both socially and environmentally.
So it's not just about the numbers, it's about the real impact.
Exactly. Are they meeting their goals?
Yeah.
Are they actually benefiting the people they're supposed to help? Are they following those social and environmental safeguards?
So it's about holding those in power accountable.
Right, and making sure that those development projects are truly serving the people.
And it gives communities a voice, right?
It does. They can demand transparency, they can voice their concerns, they can participate in the decision-making process.
So it's about shifting that power dynamic.
Yeah, from the top down to the bottom up.
Making sure that the people who are affected by these projects have a say.
Exactly. And social audits have been used in India to monitor all sorts of things like rural employment schemes, infrastructure projects, social welfare programs.
So they're actually being put into practice.
They are, and they've helped to uncover corruption, improve the way services are delivered, make sure that projects are actually meeting the needs of the communities.
That's great. So it's a tool for more effective and just development.
It is, but it's important to remember that social audits aren't a quick fix.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They require capacity building, access to information, and a supportive legal and policy environment.
Right. So you need the right conditions for them to really work.
And it's not always easy to ensure that everyone participates, especially marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And there can be power imbalances that make it hard for people to speak openly and honestly.
So they're a valuable tool, but they're not a magic bullet.
Exactly. So when we talk about social audits, we're talking about a process that involves communities and stakeholders in evaluating the social and environmental impact of these development projects and programs.
Right.
And the goal is to have transparency, accountability, and make sure the community is involved in the process. Ultimately, to make sure that these projects are benefiting the people they're supposed to help and that they're not harming the environment.
So it's a tool for positive change, but it needs the right environment to thrive.
Exactly.
Okay, so another interesting concept that we came across in the source material is this idea of restorative justice.
Yeah, it's a different way of looking at justice.
So it's not about punishment and retribution.
Right. It's about repairing the harm that's been done.
Okay.
And restoring relationships.
Interesting.
It's about moving beyond that traditional punitive model of criminal justice.
So it's more about healing than punishing.
Exactly. Restorative justice, it brings together the victims, the offenders, and the community
Okay.
to talk about what happened.
Yeah.
To understand the impact of the crime.
Okay.
For the offender to take responsibility.
Yeah.
And to figure out how to repair the harm.
So it's a more holistic approach. It recognizes that crime doesn't just affect individuals, it affects the whole community.
Exactly. And it tries to address the root causes of the crime, not just punish the symptoms.
So what does this look like in practice?
Well, there are different forms of restorative justice.
Okay.
You have victim-offender mediation, community conferencing, sentencing circles.
Yeah.
And all of these processes, they prioritize healing, reconciliation, reintegrating the offender back into the community.
So it's about finding a way to move forward.
Yeah, to acknowledge the harm that was done, but also to rebuild trust.
To rebuild the community.
Exactly.
Is this something that's actually being practiced in India?
It is. It's gaining more and more traction
Okay.
as an alternative approach to dealing with crime, especially for young offenders and minor offenses.
So it's not about letting people off the hook.
No, not at all.
It's about finding a better way, a more constructive way to address wrongdoing.
Yeah, and it's been successful in addressing things like bullying in schools, property damage, and conflicts between people. It's really interesting because it aligns with traditional Indian values.
Oh, how so?
Well, there's a strong emphasis on forgiveness, reconciliation, and harmony in the community.
So it's not just some Western concept that's being imposed.
No, it resonates with values that are already there.
But I can imagine there are challenges in implementing this kind of approach.
There are. It requires a different way of thinking. We need to train facilitators, get the community on board.
Yeah.
And it's important to be aware of those power dynamics, to make sure that no one feels pressured or re-victimized.
Right. You have to be really careful and thoughtful about how you implement it.
Absolutely. So when we define restorative justice, we're talking about this approach that focuses on fixing what was broken and healing those relationships between the victim, the offender, and the community. It's about everyone coming together, talking about what happened, taking responsibility, and working together to repair the harm.
So it's a more holistic approach, really focusing on the impact on everyone involved.
Yeah, and the goal is to achieve healing, reconciliation, and to bring the offender back into the community in a positive way.
So let's talk about education.
Okay,
It's something that keeps coming up in these
that's
sources
essential.
as a key factor in promoting social justice.
Education is a basic human right,
Mm.
and it's so powerful when it comes to transforming society.
In what way?
Well, it gives people the knowledge, the skills, the critical thinking abilities they need to participate in society, to understand their rights, and to advocate for themselves.
It's like giving people the tools they need to build a better future.
Exactly. And when everyone has access to quality education, it helps to break cycles of poverty,
Right.
promotes gender equality, and fosters tolerance and understanding between different communities. Education can really empower people to challenge discrimination, to push for social change, to hold those in power accountable.
So it's not just about learning facts and figures.
No, it's about empowering individuals to be agents of change.
But unfortunately, access to quality education in India is still very uneven.
Yeah, it is. There are huge disparities based on socioeconomic background, gender, where you live.
And those inequalities just perpetuate the problem.
They do. They reinforce existing social hierarchies and they prevent people from reaching their full potential. We need to invest in public education. Train teachers better, improve infrastructure, especially in those underserved communities. We also need to address discrimination within the education system itself.
Right.
Make sure that schools are inclusive and welcoming to everyone.
So it's not just about getting more kids into school. It's about making sure that the education system is fair and equitable for everyone.
Exactly.
So in the context of social justice, education is about facilitating learning, helping people acquire knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, habits.
It's about empowering people to think critically, to challenge those discriminatory attitudes, to promote equality and inclusion.
It's about creating a fairer and more just society.
Right. It's a fundamental human right, and it's key to social transformation.
Okay, so healthcare, another crucial element of social justice.
Absolutely. Access to affordable, quality healthcare is a basic human right, and it's vital for individual and societal well-being.
Right, but is everyone in India able to access that kind of healthcare?
Unfortunately not. There are major disparities in healthcare based on things like socioeconomic status, caste, gender, and location.
So it's not just about having hospitals and clinics.
No, it's about making sure that everyone can access them.
Without facing barriers.
Exactly, because those barriers lead to worse health outcomes.
Yeah.
And they perpetuate those cycles of disadvantage. We need to strengthen public healthcare systems.
Okay.
Especially in rural areas and underserved communities.
Right.
Invest in infrastructure, train more healthcare workers, ensure that everyone can get the essential medicines and treatments they need. And we also have to address the social factors that affect people's health.
Things like poverty and malnutrition.
Exactly. Lack of access to clean water and sanitation.
It's a reminder that health is influenced by so many different things.
It's a complex issue.
So when we talk about healthcare in the context of social justice, we're talking about making sure everyone has access to quality care, regardless of their background.
Right. It's a fundamental human right.
And it's about addressing those health disparities that exist.
To create a healthier and fairer society.
Okay, let's talk about the media.
Okay.
It plays such a big role in shaping public opinion, especially when it comes to complex issues like social justice.
The media is so powerful,
Yeah.
influences how we see the world. And it can be this incredible force for good.
How so?
Well, it can shine a light on injustices, hold those in power accountable.
Yeah.
A free and independent media is essential for any democracy.
Right.
It's like a watchdog, making sure that those in power are being watched.
Exactly. But the media landscape in India, it's not perfect. It faces some challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
Well, you have things like media ownership concentration, where a few big companies own most of the media outlets.
Right.
Political influence, commercial pressures, all of these things can compromise the media's independence.
And its objectivity.
Exactly. It can lead to biased reporting, a lack of diverse perspectives, and sometimes even the spread of misinformation. It's really important for people to be aware of these potential biases when they're consuming news.
You'd be critical thinkers.
Yeah, and to seek out diverse sources of information, to be aware of the perspectives that might be missing from the mainstream media.
So being informed and discerning is crucial.
It is.
But there are alternatives, right?
There are. We're seeing the rise of citizen journalism and alternative media platforms.
Yeah.
They can provide a platform for those marginalized voices.
Okay.
To challenge those dominant narratives.
So it's like democratizing the media.
Exactly.
Giving more people the power to share their stories and perspectives.
We need to support independent media and promote media literacy.
Yeah.
So that we have a well-informed and engaged citizenry.
To be active participants in shaping the media landscape.
Exactly.
So when we define the media in the context of social justice, we're talking about all those different ways we communicate.
Right. Print, broadcast, digital platforms. They all have the power to disseminate information and shape how the public thinks. And when the media is free and independent, it can be a powerful force for good, for holding those in power accountable.
Right.
But we also have to be aware of its potential to perpetuate biases, spread misinformation, and be influenced by powerful interests.
It's about being aware and engaged.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the role of arts and culture
Okay.
in promoting social justice.
The arts are so powerful, you know. They can express social realities,
Yeah?
challenge power structures, inspire change. Through music, theater, film, visual arts, artists and cultural practitioners can really raise awareness about important issues.
It's about using creativity to move people,
Exactly.
to change hearts and minds.
Yeah.
So the arts can challenge stereotypes, disrupt those dominant narratives, and offer different visions of a more just and equitable society.
It's like holding a mirror up to society.
Yeah.
Reflecting both its beauty and its flaws.
And art can bring people together.
It can. It can create a space for healing, for reconciliation, for community building.
So it can bridge divides and foster understanding.
Absolutely. But even with all this potential, we have to acknowledge that not everyone has equal access to the arts.
Right.
There are disparities in India, just like in other places, that limit the opportunities for marginalized communities to participate in cultural activities.
So we need to make sure that the arts are accessible to everyone.
Yeah, not just a privileged few.
Right, to support community-based cultural initiatives and promote those inclusive spaces.
That reflect the true diversity of Indian society.
So the arts should be a tool for empowerment and inclusion, not exclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we talk about arts and culture in the context of social justice, we're talking about all forms of creative expression.
Music, dance, theater, visual arts, literature, film. They all have the power to challenge norms, amplify voices, foster empathy, and inspire change. And ensuring that everyone has access to these opportunities is crucial for creating a more just and equitable society.
Okay, so another group of actors that are working in this space are the international development organizations.
Right. Those NGOs, foundations, multilateral agencies, they play a big role in supporting social justice initiatives in India.
So they're working with local organizations and communities to address issues like poverty, inequality, education, healthcare, human rights.
Exactly.
So it's about using global resources and expertise to support local efforts.
Yeah.
So they're providing funding, technical assistance, and advocacy support.
Right, to strengthen civil society, to empower those marginalized communities, and to promote development.
So they're acting as catalysts for change.
They are. But it's important to be aware that the role of these organizations is not without its critics.
Oh, really? What are some of the concerns?
Well, some people argue that they can create dependency, that they impose Western agendas,
Okay.
and that they sometimes undermine local initiatives.
So it's important to make sure they're operating in a way that's truly beneficial
Absolutely.
and empowering.
They need to be transparent and accountable. Yeah. They need to engage in genuine partnerships with local communities.
Right.
And they need to respect local knowledge and expertise.
So it's about shifting from that top-down approach
To a more collaborative one.
where the local communities are empowered.
Exactly.
To international development organizations are those entities, often non-governmental or intergovernmental, that are working to improve the lives of people in developing countries.
Right. Addressing issues like poverty, inequality, education, healthcare, human rights.
Providing a whole range of support.
They are.
Okay, so corporate social responsibility, or CSR,
Yes.
it's become a popular term these days.
It has.
You see companies touting their social and environmental initiatives all the time.
They do.
But what does it actually mean?
Well, it's the idea that businesses have a responsibility to operate in a way that benefits society,
Okay.
that they should be thinking about their social and environmental impact.
Not just about making money.
Right. It's about recognizing that companies have a role to play in addressing societal challenges.
So it's about more than just maximizing profits.
It is. It involves things like supporting community development, promoting environmental sustainability, upholding labor rights, and being ethical in your business practices.
So it's about integrating those social and environmental considerations into how you do business.
Exactly.
And in India, CSR has become even more prominent in recent years.
It has. There's actually legislation now that requires companies of a certain size to dedicate a percentage of their profits to CSR initiatives.
So the government is really pushing for businesses to contribute to the social good.
They are, but there are some who are skeptical of these CSR initiatives.
Right, why is that?
Well, some people see it as just a way for companies to make themselves look good.
A PR exercise.
Yeah, greenwashing,
Yeah.
making it seem like they're doing more than they actually are.
So it's about making sure that CSR is genuine.
It is. It has to be embedded in the company's values, not just something they tack on as an afterthought.
So it's about walking the talk.
Exactly.
So when we define corporate social responsibility, we're talking about a way of doing business that considers the well-being of all stakeholders.
Right, not just the shareholders. It's about creating economic, social, and environmental benefits for everyone.
Okay, so let's talk about religious institutions.
Okay.
They often play a big role in society, shaping values and influencing attitudes. What role do they play in promoting social justice?
Well, religious institutions have this incredible potential.
Yeah.
They have these deep-rooted values and moral teachings. They can inspire compassion, promote ethical behavior, and really mobilize communities to address those issues like poverty, inequality, discrimination.
So they can be a force for good.
They can. They can act as moral compasses, guiding people towards a more just and compassionate world. Religious leaders can advocate for social justice, challenge harmful traditions, and promote dialogue and understanding between different faiths.
So it's about harnessing the power of faith to make a positive impact.
Exactly. But we also have to be realistic. Religious institutions can also be part of the problem.
Oh, how so?
Well, they can sometimes reinforce those social hierarchies, those discriminatory attitudes.
Yeah.
They can even justify violence and oppression in some cases. It's a reminder that religious institutions, just like any other institution, they're not immune to power and prejudice.
So it's about holding them accountable.
It is. We need to look at their actions, not just their words, and challenge those institutions that are promoting intolerance and exclusion.
Making sure they're living up to those values of justice and compassion.
Exactly.
So when we define religious institutions in the context of social justice, we're talking about those organized groups that share beliefs, practices, values, often rooted in spirituality.
Right. And they can play a role in promoting social justice, advocating for human rights, challenging discrimination, providing social services, mobilizing communities. But they can also be part of the problem.
So it's about being discerning.
Yeah.
Critically evaluating their actions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into law and social justice in India.
We have.
From the complexities of the legal system to the roles of different actors in creating a fairer and more just society.
And it's clear that this fight for social justice, it's multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's ongoing. It requires us to be vigilant, to think critically, and to be willing to challenge the way things are.
It's about recognizing that these social issues are all interconnected
They are.
and that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
It's about using our voices, our actions, to make a difference.
To create a world where everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity and freedom.
Exactly. And we've seen that progress is possible, but it takes all of us working together.
A shared commitment to justice.
Yeah, and a belief that we can create positive change.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to hear from you.
What resonated with you?
What questions do you have?
What actions can we take, individually and collectively, to build a more just and equitable world?
Keep the conversation going. Talk to your friends, your family. Learn from different perspectives.
And find ways to make a difference.
Because the fight for social justice is a journey, and we all have a role to play.
Keep learning, keep questioning, keep engaging.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into law and social justice in India, let's shift our focus to the individual. What can you, our listener, do to contribute to a fairer, more just society?
That's a great question to end on. We've been through so much, all these laws, institutions, movements, but really change starts with each of us.
It can feel overwhelming, right? All these huge challenges.
Uh,
But you're saying that even small actions can have a big impact.
Absolutely. And I think a really good place to start is just by learning more about the issues you care about.
Okay.
Read those articles, those reports, listen to podcasts like this one, talk to people. The more you know, the better you'll be able to see where you can make a difference.
Knowledge is power, right?
Mhm.
But okay, so you know more, now what? How do you turn that knowledge into action?
There are so many ways, and it doesn't have to be something huge. You can volunteer your time, support organizations that are fighting for change, even just having their conversations with your friends and family, talking about these issues.
Yeah, those everyday conversations, they can really make a difference. Challenge people's thinking.
Exactly. And don't forget about your own voice. Speak up when you see injustice, challenge those discriminatory attitudes, hold people in power accountable.
Use your voice, right? Whether it's on social media, writing to your elected officials, or even just having those tough conversations with people you know.
Exactly. Every voice matters. And your choices as a consumer, they matter too. When you support businesses that are doing things the right way, ethical practices, fair treatment of workers, protecting the environment, you're sending a message.
It's like voting with your wallet, right?
Exactly. You're supporting the kind of world you want to see.
And this isn't just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Absolutely.
Always learning, reflecting, finding new ways to make a difference.
Making that commitment to justice part of your everyday life, your choices, your interactions with others.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with this. Never underestimate your power to make a change. Every action, every conversation, every choice, it all adds up. It creates this ripple effect that moves us towards a world that's fairer, more just, more equitable for everyone.
Keep learning, keep questioning, keep pushing for change, and never lose faith in the power of people working together to create a better future.